Everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balcavage and Dr. Erica Riggleman. We're back with another edition of the Thyroid Answers Podcast. And Dr. Erica, how are you today?
I'm doing fabulous.
You know that we have a very special guest on today, and she was her book, The Paleo Approach, was like one of the earliest resources when I got into functional medicine to try and help my patients understand what the heck they were supposed to be doing and eating and how all this thing came about. So we have on with us Dr. Sarah Ballantyne. Dr. Sarah Ballantyne, welcome to the Thyroid Answers Podcast. How are you today?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great.
Well, we are super excited to have you on. And if people don't know who you are, I mean, Dr. She's an award-winning speaker, right? She's got a number of books. I think you got 4 or 5 books out by now, right? I'm not sure how you do it.
Soon to be 5.
Soon to be 5. You've got a podcast that you do. You got a whole bunch of online resources, like short little things that you can learn. You got the AIP lecture series. You got the Paleo Mom website. I don't know how you do it all and be like a mom and everything else, but we're so excited to have you on the podcast. We got a lot of questions for you, but if there's a chance that somebody doesn't know who you are, can you give the listeners a little bit about your background, because they need to know that you aren't in this because you're just coming from outside in, but you're actually coming this from the inside.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I actually was a medical researcher, and I was a hypothyroid sufferer. And I learned probably 3 decades after my symptoms started that I have Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So I pretty much struggled through growing up, all of my teenage years, my 20s, my early 30s, going to graduate school, doing a PhD in medical biophysics, doing postdoctoral research in very high profile, super intense laboratory environments. And I struggled with my health through all of that. So I'm one of those people who, and I think probably a lot of listeners can relate, feeling terrible all of the time was so much my normal that it actually made me like more stubborn and more ambitious. So I'm one of those people who, because I was always tired, because I always had joint pain, because I always had GI issues, because I always had just minor depression, minor anxiety, just always at the surface. I had frequent migraines. I just ended up being one of those people who became very, very good at ignoring what my body was screaming at me, not just whispering, but like full screaming at the top of whatever volume it could do. And pursuing this career in what I thought, when I started coming into sort of alternative and complementary medicine, I thought was unrelated, but really I was studying critical care medicine. So in the intensive care unit, you have a lot of situations where the immune system goes out of control and attacks the body, but in a non-specific way, in a non-targeted way. Whereas in autoimmune disease, you have the immune system go kind of, it's like a storm, right? So it's like a storm where it just gets so on overdrive that it attacks the body, but only in a targeted way. So it turns out those conditions are extraordinarily related. So I come from this background where I was on track for the super high profile academic research career. I was studying gene therapy. I identified a new tumor suppressor gene involved in colon and breast cancer. Like I did some really, really cool stuff. And I loved it. It was my jam. I wanted to be a medical researcher from the time I was 7. And I was there. I was at the beginning of this burgeoning career. And I was so sick. And when my first daughter was born, afterwards, the typical experience for Hashis to sort of go into remission during pregnancy and then have the payback after the baby's born. So when I experienced the down payment that I had to make for the remission during pregnancy, I realized all of a sudden, okay, so now I was barely holding on in terms of my academic career with all of the health conditions. At that point, I knew I was hypothyroid, but I didn't know I had Hashimoto's thyroiditis, but I had a dozen different diagnosed health conditions. I was morbidly obese, and I was borderline type 2 diabetic, and everything was falling apart, and I felt terrible all the time. And all of a sudden I went from like, okay, I was barely holding on to, oh, baby that doesn't sleep and cries all the time and is colicky. And it was just that extra life spice, that meant I realized I couldn't do it all. Like I just was falling apart. I could barely get out of bed to look after this baby, let alone try to balance an academic career right at the point when you are a junior professor. Your ability to continue your research program is dependent on grant funding. Like it's a very, very high pressure point of an academic career for about 10 years. So it's about 10-year period of time where academic professionals are working, typically 70, 80 hours a week with not enough funding to do everything they want to do. They're doing a lot of research themselves because they can't fund enough graduate students. It's a really intense time. And I was trying to do that with a baby. And so I ended up deciding to take time off of my academic research career, thanks to a program by the National Institutes of Health here in America that will allow women to take up to 8 years off of their academic careers, provided they meet a certain academic or educational threshold, which I did. And then they help fund your reentry into sciences afterwards. And I said, look, this program is here for people like me. I'm going to use it. I'm going to take this break from my academic career. I'm going to focus on motherhood, and I'm going to focus on myself. And it was that space that allowed me just time in my head to start thinking about the problem of my own health and applying my scientific background to the problem of my own health. And that is what brought me to the Paleo Diet, which ended up not being enough. I needed to go full autoimmune protocol. And then this thing was really fascinating and I wanted to know the science behind it. And then I realized that I wanted to share what I was learning, and that there actually is a real hunger out there for the education piece, right? So not just the eat this, don't eat this food lists and rules, which a lot of diets are sort of based on just what you eat and what you don't, but really why? Like why is eating this helpful, and why is eating this driving autoimmunity? And so that was the creation of my website, which ended up becoming this amazing confluence of my skills, where I realized that my background as somebody who has suffered symptoms from about 10 years old was when everything really started for me, and grew up with symptoms, and had it not just impact my life choices, but impact my personality. Like I have personality traits that are the direct result of my experiences with autoimmune disease as a teenager. And so to have this experience where I love medical research, I love doing those deep dives into the scientific literature. I'm actually quite good at writing about that science for the layperson. And then also I have this passion for it because of my personal experience. That has been the things that have brought me to where I am now, which I consider myself a health educator. And I hit my 8-year mark last year, where I had to go back before 8 years. And I made the conscientious choice at that point that this is where I'm meant to be. I'm not meant to be in a lab pipetting for 8 hours straight. I'm meant to be this bridge between the medical literature and a healthcare provider and the patient, so that everybody can see how much knowledge there is in the scientific literature to help inform our choices and help us really get to the root causes of disease in a way that isn't just masking symptoms. It's not a pill that's just a Band-Aid that's not actually going to make you feel better. It's just going to help you continue to do what I did, which is ignore my body and force myself through my day-to-day life.
Yeah, I think when we take a look at the literature, because I'm a research nerd as well, and most of what we need to know is in there.
Yeah.
It's just nobody's pulling those pieces. And I think you're doing a fantastic job pulling it together. And that's where our kind of approach from a cellular hypothyroid state, I mean, everything really starts to a great degree with what's happening in our peripheral cells, because all of that stuff is what feeds the brain. All of that stuff tells the body what's going on. So it's all these individual cells. So I think you're doing the right thing, because you're helping so many people. And sometimes out of trauma and travesty comes some amazing things. So let me ask you a question. When you were young, right, you were struggling with these chronic symptoms at that time. Were people testing you for hypothyroidism, or it was just like you're a pudgy kid, you eat too much, you don't exercise enough, right? Those types of things.
I actually developed an eating disorder because nothing I did worked. So I started gaining weight when I hit early puberty, which is again a sort of symptom of Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And I started gaining weight with puberty in a way that was completely disproportionate to how active I was as a kid. I was the kid who would get home from school and hop on my bike with my little brother, and we'd go biking around the neighborhood for 3-4 hours. I mean, it was the olden days too. So like way in the past when kids did that, didn't have cell phones. But, but I, my mom was pretty, she wasn't a full-blown hippie, but she was pretty crunchy. We grew a lot of our own food. We grew up near the ocean. We would literally go down to the beach and pick shellfish for dinner. There was a lot of things in my upbringing that are things that I really espouse now, because its focus on wild edibles and, the most nutrient-dense foods that we can possibly find. And I just kept gaining weight. And in my family, there was two things that was happening. One is there was this idea that I must be doing something wrong. It must be my fault. And I internalized that. So I completely internalized, it's my fault. That ice cream sandwich that I buy at school on Fridays is the reason why I'm 30, 40 pounds heavier than any other kid. Clearly it's my fault. Never mind the fact that I'm sitting beside the super skinny kid who's eating a bag of Doritos for lunch.
And he had 5 ice creams.
Right. Like, clearly this is my fault because of these few things here in my diet that are not optimal.
Right.
So that is what fed that defeatism is what eventually fed binge eating disorder. So I did eventually develop an eating disorder out of that experience, which then obviously accelerated my weight gain beyond hypothyroidism. But I had this other aspect of celiac disease and hypothyroidism run in my family, and a lot of undiagnosed, or what has since been diagnosed.
Right.
And so those types of symptoms were normalized in my family. There was this, you fall asleep every time you get in the car. It's just like your Uncle Bob, or, oh yeah, all of us have GI issues when we travel, or, oh, you've got the family constipation gene. Like it really was all of the things that were not normal that in a more robust family would have been highlighted. They were so normalized in my family. I never thought to tell a doctor until I was off at grad school. And that was when the wheels started to fall off the cart more. I developed adult onset asthma that was so severe I was coughing up blood, and I was put on very high doses of prednisone for months and apartment bound. And it probably tangential to a hypothyroid, flare, but not recognized at the time. And that was when doctors started testing me and testing my thyroid. But of course, having a look at T4 and TSH, that's it. And I didn't have antibodies measured until after I was actually feeling better with diet changes and lifestyle changes. And through that part of my journey, found functional medicine and found a functional medicine practitioner to actually do a full thyroid panel. And at that point, it was almost, I do take thyroid hormone replacement, but it was almost just it was an academic exercise, because I had already done so much healing on my own that it was more just the explanation of the entire journey up until that point. But I had 3 blood tests, 2 in my 20s and 1 in my early 30s, where a doctor said, oh yeah, your thyroid levels are a bit low. We'll keep an eye on it. That was it. We'll keep an eye on it. No follow-up testing. No, let's do a full thyroid panel. And no, not really keeping an eye on it either. It was, I was gaining weight. Again, granted, I did have binge eating disorder, but I would sort of go through these periods of time where I would keep everything, just gritting my teeth, keep my food intake really, really measured and not lose weight. And so that was what caught my doctor's attention at the time. And it just turned into more blame, right? So, well, it's, your TSH isn't 14. So clearly there's no reason to pursue this any further. So you just need to eat less or exercise more, right? It just became here's another way that you're failing as a human being. And in the absence of any other answer, what else was I supposed to think other than my weight is a direct result of me being a failure? And so it led to not just eating disorder, but a lot of self-esteem, self-worth issues that even all these years later, there's still leftovers of that emotional experience. And it's those leftovers that really, it really drives what I do now in terms of creating resources to help people, because I consider it my job, because of all of the things that I've learned and because of my background, is to help people not hit the same health lows that I had to hit to find answers. But it's also because I still have those emotional struggles that are the direct result of autoimmune disease. That is why I'm able to connect with sufferers in such a personal way, because it's a common experience. I'm not the only one. That's the thing that's remarkable about this story, is I can say autoimmune disease caused me to develop an eating disorder and severe depression. And that's like everybody. That is the experience. That is what we all go through. We all go through doctors telling us that it's all in our head. We're crazy. Oh, you're just stressed. And especially women, which of course is 2/3 of autoimmune sufferers. We also then get that experience compounded with the sort of misogyny that is still in the traditional medical field, where it's, oh,
you're a hysterical female.
You're just a hysterical woman, not taking these like, no, I have joint pain. My feet feel like someone threw shards of glass in between all the little bones when I first get out of bed in the morning. Like that's not right. And when you have enough doctors tell you that it's just in your head, you start to believe it.
Yeah. And unfortunately, a lot of patients are told that. And then they, just like with your upbringing, they don't realize that those symptoms were warning signs. They just think, oh, it must be because I'm doing this or that. And they suppress that stuff. But I can tell you that your mission and your passion is making an impact in people. I can't tell you how many patients I've had come in who your work has been the turning point for them, saying something's not right. I've tried this. I've noticed a little bit of improvements. I'm coming to you because I need more guidance in this. And so your work is definitely making an impact in people. And I think that, your mission of letting people know that that's not, you can't just accept that normal, and that you should, if a doctor tells you that, oh, you're crazy, it's in your head, and just dismisses you, that, you may want to look other places than just, what they're telling you at that point, that those are signs. You can't really ignore them. And the education part that you were talking about is big, with the patients, because they do need to know the why. I always try to educate my patients on, okay, we need to remove this from your diet, or we need to do that. And if they don't understand why, then they're not going to follow through with it. And so I think the education part of it is really, really important.
I agree completely. I think that, I'm this kind of person, but I think that this is a very common experience. I think most of us, if you are given a set of rules, we find where we can bend the rules, right? I liken it to a speed limit. So a lot of people, I don't want to make a sweeping generalization and say everybody, but it's very common to just go 5 miles an hour over the speed limit, right? Just a little bit. Then you've got your ultra speeders, right? Those are the people who have flagrant disregard for rules. But it's the wiggle room of, the speed limit's 25, but I know this road so well. I know I can go 35 around these corners. Like, it's totally fine. I know this road. And I think that we approach dietary recommendations with that same, I know I should, but because we don't have a thorough understanding of why, we treat it like a speed limit where we're finding all the ways that we can bend the rules. Mm-hmm. And I think when you actually explain, like, what is this food doing for my body that's beneficial versus this food that's doing to my body that's undermining my health, mm-hmm. Suddenly we're thinking about it. We're thinking about how tight that corner is, and how that car that went, over the cliff at that point last year. Well, now that turn, because I understand that turn, I am going to follow the sign. I'm going to follow that recommendation to slow down here. Food is the same way. When we can really understand why, it's not just I'm following the rules and I'm doing what I'm told. It's I'm making an informed choice based on this body of knowledge that I have acquired to better support my health. And that's different than being perfect, right? That's different than making the best choice 100% of the time. Mm-hmm. But when we're making an informed choice, that also means we're making informed choices when we choose to indulge or give ourselves some more leeway. And that means that when we do something like that, so I'm traveling and I'm going to let myself eat these foods that I wouldn't normally eat, it doesn't become this like snowball effect of here's now that I've given myself this little bit of wiggle room, might as well throw the rules out the window. Instead, because it's a conscientious choice to do something suboptimal, it becomes easier to get back on track when we know that we need to. That was definitely taking the toll on my body, or vacation's over, time to hop back into normal life, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's just not your head that you've got to manage those thoughts, because it's other people around you saying it's just one bite. Why can't you just have it this one time? And if you aren't sound in your decision of knowing why you have to follow that, you may give into those pressures, because there's always going to be Easter and birthdays and holidays and 4th of July and Christmas. It doesn't matter what time of the year, there's always going to be those parties and events that are going to be pressuring you to try to get off the wagon.
Yeah, I think the key is most people they're going with traffic, right? Mm-hmm. They're going with the flow of traffic. So if you are with a bunch of people and this is how people eat, and this is this is just how people have done it. And we've been educated that this is the standard American diet is the way to eat, and it's healthy and there's no problem with food. And if don't worry about food, that's not the problem. It's a drug deficiency or it's a supplement deficiency. Both of those things get up my ires. And
drug deficiency. Oh, your problem is you're not taking enough statins. That's your whole problem.
Or we have the same issue in our functional medicine world, where people will say, hey, you just need to take mega doses of vitamin D or mega doses of fish oil, and that'll fix the problem. We often see, I think I posted something on Instagram the other day, a patient of mine was complaining that eating healthy whole food diet was too expensive, and yet they were taking about 15 to 20 individual supplements every day. And I'm like, wait, whoa, what are we doing here, right? We're making we have a really mixed message going on, but it's all driven by big media, big marketing, big money, essentially, is what's driving it, instead of just simple principles. So I want to make sure we get you on a couple of the big questions. And one of those things is the paleo diet. And there is maybe 10,000 diets that have come and gone, right? What's the benefit of what is the paleo diet? For those who don't know, what is the real paleo diet, right? And then we need to distinguish what's the paleo diet from the autoimmune paleo diet.
Sure. So the paleo diet is something that has evolved over time. So I'm going to give my contemporary definition of what this diet is, which I think is different than how somebody, a thought leader in this community, might have described it 10 years ago. What they might have said 10 years ago is we're eating the way our prehistoric ancestors ate, the way we're genetically adapted to eat. And I'm not going to use that eat like a caveman soundbite, because I think it opens up the paleo diet to a lot of very valid criticism. Mm-hmm. My approach, as somebody with a medical research background, is to go through the medical literature and look at how compounds in food impact the human body at the cellular molecular level. So we're looking at how foods are feeding the gut microbiome, how foods are impacting gut barrier health, how foods are impacting immune regulation, hormone regulation, neurotransmitter regulation. We're looking at the nutrient requirements of the different biological systems in the human body and whether or not those foods supply those nutrients. And we're looking at essential nutrients and non-essential nutrients. And when you look at what the body needs in terms of nutrients, what foods have that, and then compounds that are in foods, mostly manufactured foods, but there are some foods, sort of natural food sources of problematic compounds as well. Look at what are compounds in foods that are undermining our health in maybe like subtle ways where we don't, that's why we're not throwing up after we eat that food, but it's slowly building in our bodies and contributing to this erosion of our health, which ends up in a chronic illness diagnosis. So when you look at those compounds, and I broadly think of them as good stuff and bad stuff, right? So good stuff is stuff that our bodies need. They're essential nutrients, vitamins, minerals, essential amino acids, essential fatty acids, slow-burning carbohydrates, fiber, antioxidant phytochemicals. So the things that our bodies need for health, some of those are considered non-essential, but just because we don't die if we don't eat them doesn't mean we don't need them, right? So they're still critically important for health versus bad stuff. So trans fats, fructose, added sugars, gluten, I would put in the bad stuff category because it's inflammatory and contributes to leaky gut in almost everyone. And it's also probably linked to fat metabolism and contributing to obesity, right? So there's lots of ways in the scientific literature I can point to why gluten is a suboptimal compound. And then foods just go on the sliding scale. So if a food has lots of good stuff, it's a good food to eat. If it doesn't have very much bad stuff, has lots of bad stuff, not very much good stuff, that's a food that's not doing us any favors. And then when you do it that way, you end up with a diet that is plant-based. So we're eating 2/3 to 3/4 of every plate is covered in fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds. You end up with a focus on high quality protein. So eating snout to tail, including lots of organ meat, eating lots of seafood, but eating modest proportions of protein and having every meal be fairly balanced in terms of macronutrients. So I usually say 30, 30, 40, and whether fat or carbs is the 40 doesn't really matter. And then it's micronutrient sufficient. So we're looking at getting all of the nutrients that our bodies need to be optimally healthy from our food. So that's the paleo diet. Where the autoimmune protocol differs is recognizing that people with autoimmune disease are a more sensitive population. So we are not going to be able to tolerate the same small amounts of problematic compounds for the sake of some beneficial compounds in a food, the way somebody who has more robust genetics and fewer environmental exposures are. So where the difference is basically where we draw the line with everything in between. So there's the obvious wins, right? Shellfish, fish, most vegetables. There's the obvious lose foods, right? So like gluten-containing grains, soy, peanuts. There's a lot of foods that fall in between, like tomatoes. Tomatoes have a lot of really compelling nutrients and also some incredibly inflammatory compounds. So on the autoimmune protocol, what we do is we just say, well, look, we can't tolerate these inflammatory compounds for the sake of all this lycopene. So we're going to take this food that would otherwise be paleo, and we're going to eliminate it. And we're going to focus even more so on these sort of nutrient-dense superstar foods like cruciferous vegetables and mushrooms and shellfish and liver and other organ meat. We're going to flood the body with nutrients. And so the difference between paleo and the autoimmune protocol is really where you draw the line in terms of the gray areas, whereas paleo allows for more flexibility. And certainly they both templates respect bioindividuality, but the paleo diet assumes that you are more robust, and the autoimmune protocol assumes that you're more sensitive. The autoimmune protocol still has this ability to play with these foods that are eliminated. So there's what's called reintroductions, where you test your individual tolerance to the eliminated foods to see what really is driving disease activity versus, some of these foods really do have compelling nutrition. There's a lot of really compelling reasons for reintroducing them if they're tolerated, but we just cut out everything that might be driving disease activity to just basically detoxify the body of all of those compounds, flood it with nutrients, work on the lifestyle factors that are also inputs to health, and give our bodies it's just the space, right? It's the opportunity to just take a breath and relax and go, aha, yeah, I don't need to attack my own thyroid. I cannot do that, and just give our bodies just the space to be able to figure themselves out. And that's what the autoimmune protocol is.
So, we talk about this on the podcast all the time. Some form of cellular stress triggers an inflammatory mechanism, or what we call a cell danger response. And then the immune system becomes a little bit more upregulated. It's looking for more bad guys, right? So the paleo diet, if we're just going to say it, it's not a meat, it's not the carnivore diet, right? It's not just meat and fat, right? It is really
not low carb. Like the standard paleo diet is pretty balanced and it's nutrient focused.
Right. I think what we see in the functional medicine space sometimes is we've circled the wagons and we shoot in, right? Everybody wants to have their version of my vegetarian's better than this. And listen, eat real food. And I think what you're saying in the paleo diet, and especially in your book, is hey, eat more real whole food and kind of eat them in balanced proportions. You don't have to be keto to be healthy. You don't have to be this to be, just eat more real food. And if the diet's centered around eating more real healthy food, you're probably going to be healthier. If that's not working as well as you want it to do, and you already know you have chronic autoimmune issues, then you get into this, hey, let's let's remove some of those foods that in some people can be more problematic, and let's just kind of minimize those, let the body heal and repair, and then we start bringing some of those things back and see how you tolerate them. And in the meantime, we've got to work on what are all the other stressors, right? That are triggering.
Or exposures or underlying infections, right? There's a lot of, and this is where I think what your messaging is so consistent with mine, because my research and my education is focused on diet and lifestyle. Mm-hmm. That can only get you so far. If you're dealing with,
sleep. I mean, you wrote a great thing on sleep, right? If you're not getting sleep, that creates chronic inflammation. If you're mouth breathing at night, you're creating cell hypoxia, which deactivates thyroid hormone locally. So, I mean, there's all those little pieces. You can't just be, I'm gluten-free, life's going to be fixed, right? The dietary piece is a huge potential piece, but it's not the piece. Right?
I think it needs to be dialed in order to unmask what else needs to be addressed. So I think in functional medicine, for example, because I see the autoimmune protocol as a tool for functional medicine.
Yep.
I know functional medicine specialists who, when their patients come in with autoimmune disease, the first thing they do is say, okay, we're just going to do a month of AIP, and then we're going to see what's not addressed, and then we're going to do testing. And it's because some people can get all the way there with just diet and lifestyle changes, right? Like some people get 100% of the way there, but see how far that can get you before you need to sink in how much money in, right? Well, maybe you have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. That's unlikely to get better without intervention. Maybe you have H. pylori. Maybe you have Lyme disease. Maybe you have some kind of problem with your detoxification systems. Maybe you've had some kind of toxic environmental exposure, right? Those things might be somewhat mitigated by changes to diet and lifestyle, but are unlikely to be fixed, and they're going to continue to drive disease activity, which is where functional approaches to medicine, or integrative approaches to medicine, however you want to term it, and the autoimmune protocol come together. And that's why I see them as being sort of complementary to each other.
I think it's part of almost everybody's protocol, starting with that. Yeah.
So let's say that somebody goes on an autoimmune protocol. They remove all those more bad foods that they're creating issues in the body, and they remove them out. How long of a time should somebody be on that? I often get patients, their first question when you make a suggestion that they've got to remove some of those foods is, do I have to do this forever? And so how long of a period of time should somebody have those removed from the diet before they attempt to add them back in?
I think it's really important to emphasize that the autoimmune protocol is not a life sentence. And it's a lot of people will see this list of foods to avoid. I always try to communicate first what we eat and second what we don't eat, because it's a lot less intimidating when you see these giant food lists of all the amazing, delicious foods we get to eat, and then this shorter list of things that we're going to avoid. But because reintroductions are an important part of this protocol, there is this self-experimentation phase where we're testing our own individual tolerance. And most people end up on a maintenance diet that is AIP plus, right? So it's AIP plus eggs, nuts, seeds, chocolate, right? So it puts those foods that do have compelling nutrition, but maybe some problematic compounds back in the diet. That maintenance diet typically ends up being the diet that people will follow most of the time. There might be some more wiggle room foods that are identified that if I eat this once a month on vacation, it's not going to be a big deal. I call those sort of sometimes foods. So there's this huge part of the AIP that is a self-discovery process. And I like to think of it not as a diet that you have to follow, but a toolbox. So you end up with the diet and lifestyle tools that you need to be optimally healthy and also to recover when life gets in the way. So what happens is once you've found this sort of maintenance diet that is AIP with some reintroductions, that might look a lot like paleo, but it might include some foods that aren't even traditionally considered paleo. You might reintroduce lentils, for example, and that wouldn't traditionally be considered paleo, but this research would tell you that if they're traditionally prepared, they actually can add positive nutrition to your diet. So most people end up on this sort of maintenance phase, but then flares happen. Stress can drive a flare. An infection can drive a flare. A we don't have control over things, right? A death in the family, moving, something that happens that erodes your sleep quality, a change in your job, a change in your shifts that you're working. Teenagers are horrible for autoimmune disease. I can say this because I'm about to have one in the house.
Right.
But what the autoimmune protocol does is it gives you those tools to go, okay, I'm going through all this stuff because of something that's outside of my control. Now's when I tighten things up for a little while. And so I think that because we have this toolbox, part of the autoimmune protocol is getting to reintroductions. So people get afraid of them. So you have these two things, right? So you have this, I don't want to do this if I have to do it for too long. Tell me what's the minimum amount of time I have to do this. Mm-hmm. Then you get well, no, I feel so much better eating this way. I don't want to try those reintroductions. I'm scared of them. And sometimes it's the same person who goes through that journey from, I don't want to do this, to a month later going, no, I'm never doing reintroductions. I think that reintroductions should be tackled somewhere between 30 days and 3 months, provided that you're starting to see improvement in symptoms so that you can identify if that food's not working for you. So if that food's not working for you, you need to have somewhere bad to go in order to be able to identify it as a problematic food. So you need to be feeling better enough that you'll notice if you're not feeling better. But also, if you get to 3 months on strict AIP and you're not feeling better, that's time to dig deeper. Don't keep hitting your head against the hopefully proverbial wall. Don't AIP harder. Don't cut more things out. Do some smart testing, work with a functional medicine practitioner to dig deep and look at what are things that are going on in your body that food can't fix, because food can't fix everything. So if you are feeling better and you want to take reintroductions at a very relaxed pace, I think that's fine. It took me about 10 months for my skin to completely clear on the autoimmune protocol, but I was trying some reintroductions in that time. They kept not working for me, but 10 months was about the magic period of time for me. That's long. Skin tends to be longer. Most people will feel better faster than that. And I think it's really important to go into the autoimmune protocol knowing that reintroductions are a really important part of it. That's the part where you really understand your body. Even if they don't go well, that's really empowering information that you have now. And if they do go well, that's an amazing new delicious food that you can include in your diet from now on. And I think that we have both the two things where we want to rush it. We're not actually feeling well enough to be able to identify if the food's not working, and we're jumping the gun into reintroductions. But then we also have that fear of reintroductions where we wait too long. And just from an elimination and challenge perspective, that 1 to 3 month mark is ideal for identifying food interactions. So the way an elimination and challenge diet works is you literally down-regulate the regulatory mechanisms in the immune system. So the things that are constraining a response to that food die down faster than the effector cells, right? The cells that are driving the reaction. So when you consume a food in that window, the reaction is magnified, which makes it easy to identify. It also makes it frustrating when it's there, but it makes it the easiest period of time to really identify if that food is working for you or not. So there's really compelling reasons to try reintroductions on, I think, a shorter time scale than a lot of people right now are doing them at.
So what do you feel for most people when they're trying to reintroduce food? What's the best way to do it? Is there a time frame of eating the certain food for certain days in a row, not eating it? What have you seen? Because I think we probably all have a similar approach, but just so the listeners get it.
Yeah, so I recommend a hybrid approach between a food sensitivity challenge and a food allergy challenge, but like standard protocols that an allergist would use, whether they suspected a sensitivity or an allergy. So you take a day to challenge one food. You have an incredibly infinitesimal amount to start with. And this is because of allergies, right? So you end up being very cautious initially because if it's an allergic reaction and that allergic reaction is going to be big, that's like call 911 and get an EpiPen time. So you want to be cautious. You wait 5 to 10 minutes because an allergy is fast. An allergy is going to be really fast. So then, and then also an allergy sensitizes quickly. So that first little bit is to sensitize. And then you have a teaspoon, a bite, a nibble, right? Depending on the food, you're scaling in relation to what a whole serving would be. And then you wait an hour, and then you have a whole serving. And then you could even, so you really need to have it at least 3 times, getting a little bit more each time in a single day. And then you wait. You can do a fourth time if you really want to. So you can add a time like 2 hours beyond. And that would be this sort of hybrid challenge protocol. And then you wait 4 days without eating it again, without trying anything new. And that's because while an allergy is very fast, an intolerance is a slow build reaction. So an intolerance reaction can start anywhere between 4 hours, typically 2 to 3 days, but up to 4 days later. And so you really want to give yourself that period of time. And it's why mild reactions can be really challenging to identify. It's really easy to say, well, no, I'm tired and grumpy today because I didn't sleep well last night. Oh, but you might be tired and grumpy because you're having an immune reaction to that food you challenged 2 days ago. So definitely also, like, don't challenge a food when you're stressed, when you're feeling under the weather for whatever reason. You want to do it in a sort of a time where you have a lot of control and you're going to be able to identify those symptoms. So I sort of suggest, new food every 4 days, which is slow going typically. But that's sort of like the optimal procedure for the whole idea is to be able to identify if that food is working for you or not. At the end of 4 days, if you haven't had any symptoms crop up, and I definitely recommend doing this with a journal, go for it. That's when you can start adding it regularly. Every once in a while, there will be a food that, especially when they're not triggering immune responses, but they're triggering other effects. So maybe they're negatively impacting gut microbiome composition. They're skewing your microbiome in a way that's not working for you, where they look like they work on that initial challenge. And it's when it starts becoming a daily food that you can just sort of see your health kind of like slide backwards, right? And it's just this erosion. And that's where, again, a food and symptom journal through the entire reintroduction phase can be really helpful, because you can go, well, no, wait, like, when did I start waking up in the morning with a headache? Let's go back. When did that actually start? What was the food that I started eating regularly back then? It's much, much easier to do that if you have a written record than if you don't. So every once in a while, there can be a food that doesn't really cause a problem until it becomes a daily food. But I would say most often, if you're going through introductions methodically, you'll be able to identify a problematic food within those 4 days of challenge.
Great. So what do you think if a person is new, if they're struggling with chronic symptomatology, right?
Mm-hmm.
Haven't been diagnosed hypothyroid, they're told, it's the kind of classic thing. They have all the symptoms. Their lab tests are normal. We won't get into the argument as to why those tests are normal, but we will just say that, hey, they're struggling. Where do you see most people should start? I'm pretty sure I know your answer already, but I'll let you kind of answer that already. I'm struggling. My health's not where I want to be. Where should somebody really start?
I mean, I think my answer is a little bit dependent on where they are right now. So let's assume a person who's eating a standard American diet, who feels terrible, who has fatigue and joint pain and just feels crummy all the time, but doesn't have a diagnosis. All their tests are coming back, right, normal, doesn't have an explanation. That's a really tough place to be, to not have a name for what you're going through. And I want to emphasize, though, that if you get your diagnosis, that's all it is. It's a name. It's a name for explaining your symptoms. It's not going to change how you feel to have that name. And it's not going to change what the best practices are moving forward. And how amazing would it be to be able to reverse your disease before you even get a diagnosis? Like, that's actually the prime time too, is the earlier you intervene with diet and lifestyle, the higher the potential of full remission. So the higher the potential for all of your symptoms reversing and your life to be like magical unicorns and rainbows ever after.
Right.
That's what happens, right? So my recommendation is a focus on, let's say 5 things. Nutrient sufficiency first and foremost. So nutrient sufficiency means that we're getting all of the essential and non-essential nutrients that we need from food. That is going to necessitate, for most people eating a standard American diet, pretty big shift in their diet. They're going to start eating 10 times more vegetables than they're eating now. They're going to go from half a serving a day or 1 serving a day to 8 to 10. They're going to start eating more seafood. And instead of eating an average of 16 pounds of seafood a year, which is what the average American eats, it's going to be more like 50 or 100 pounds. Starting to plug into the local food movement, going to farmers markets, going to change where you shop. In that focus, you can just let those nutrient-dense foods displace the stuff that wasn't helping you, right? So you can just, well, no, wait, instead of having a dinner roll, I'm going to have a sweet potato. You can just let those nutrient-dense foods slowly, like, outcompete the terrible stuff. But that is the second focus, is on eliminating at least the most problematic foods. So for anyone who's just really feeling crummy and might think they're somewhere on the autoimmune disease spectrum, I would recommend gluten-free, dairy-free, and soy-free as a bare minimum. Bare minimum. From there, obviously there's a lot more eliminations on the autoimmune protocol, but you can take steps towards the AIP. So instead of doing full AIP and then methodically reintroducing, you can actually, if you're not in a situation where your disease is life-threatening, if you're not in a situation where it's so eroding your quality of life that you can't function, which is where a lot of people are when they start the AIP, you can flip the protocol where you focus on the nutrient density piece and the lifestyles. Those are the other things that I'm going to get to. And then in terms of eliminations, eliminate the most likely culprits that are almost certainly not working for you. And then you can go, all right, I still need more. What am I still eating that might be a problem? Okay, I'll eliminate that. All right, and you can step towards the AIP from the other side, or it's like reverse engineering it.
Yeah.
But then sleep, phenomenally important. Almost, something like 3/4 of Americans don't get enough sleep.
Yeah.
And that's no measurement of sleep quality is in there. That's just total sleep.
Right.
So I would think that the percent that aren't getting enough good sleep is even higher. Manage stress, which means figure out how to meditate or go for nature walks or play with your pets or cuddle with your kids or find a yoga class. There's so many different ways to increase our resilience to stress, but find something in there that makes you feel when you're stuck in traffic and you're late for a meeting, it should be fine. It's totally fine. It's, oh, well, here it is. And if your reaction is anything but pure zen to that situation, you need to increase resilience activities and then physical activity, movement. So it is incredibly stressful in our bodies to sit all day, and incredibly stressful on our bodies to sit all day and then go to the gym for 2 hours and try to make up for it. So finding movement throughout the day and then some more moderately vigorous activity throughout the week is sort of that sweet spot in terms of regulating the immune system, regulating hormones, all of the things that we actually, in the end, care about, right? We care about health and longevity. So all of those things are maximized by constant movement throughout the day and then a moderate level of physical activity, not intense, strenuous, like not endurance activity that actually undermines our health in a lot of ways. So finding that sweet spot of activity. And so that's a heavy focus on lifestyle and a heavy focus on nutrient density. And then eliminations they're kind of there on the side. I think most of us can get really, really far in our health just by eating more vegetables and sleeping more and getting out for a walk every day.
Yeah. And I think that's, it's a continual theme that we talk about in the podcast is diet, lifestyle, sleep, activity, exercise, doing those things that in a way that they're beneficial. You're never going to get rid of all the stress, but what you're trying to do is really balance the stress, right? So with the stuff that's kind of creates more what we call negative stress, you need to balance some things with positive stress. So I think that's good. I'm pretty sure that you were going to take that nutrition road down, or it was, which is, hey, really the place to start is eat better food. I mean, just keep it. Don't be so, I can't do it because that's so restrictive, that diet. Look, just spend the initial part eating better food, working on sleep quality, get a bit more active. So all those foundational things you said are the things that are common themes on this podcast. So I'm glad you kind of brought those in. And unfortunately, we're getting towards the time of our time. We could probably geek out here for another 2-3 hours if everything was going well. But I know Dr. Erica's got places to go. You have things to do, and maybe we can get you back on the podcast. Yeah. I know you have. I know you got something else coming up in the works. There's another book coming. You alluded to it. So can you give us a teaser?
I can give you the teaser. There's no place to send you yet for pre-orders or any of those awesome things. But I'm wrapping up 3 years of research into the gut microbiome and a new gut microbiome book. And it's been fast. It's been the hardest book to write by far. And that's in the context of my 6.5-pound Paleo Principles as my 4th book. So this book, it's been a huge challenge, in part because there's a lot of researchers that dabble in microbiome research and they don't necessarily talk to each other. They're not publishing in the same journals. They're not going to the same conferences. So the research is even more scattered than the sort of normal diet research is. So that makes it really hard to sort of, I feel like an investigative reporter trying to find these papers to draw the actual information out. But it's been super exciting because one of the things that I chose to do with this book was build a diet from the ground up based on the impact on the gut microbiome. And what's fascinating is, you know what it looks like? Kind of like with a few foods that maybe should be receive a little bit lower emphasis, and a few foods that maybe should receive a little bit higher emphasis. There are, right, so like gluten-free oats are like strangely they're a gluten cross reactor, so they're not going to work for a lot of people with autoimmune disease, but they are very beneficial for the microbiome. But those fiber types you can get from mushrooms, right? So there's these interesting places to have discussion around these sort of gut microbiome superfoods. But it's been fascinating, and I'm really excited about it. So hopefully it'll be out late 2019 or early 2020. I'm really at sort of the tail end of writing now, but it's been exciting, and it's been a really fun topic to research and educate myself about and do this deep dive into. And I'm finding so much information that nobody is talking about in not just conventional medicine, but in alternative medicine, complementary medicine. Like, this is information that has not permeated into the general public in any way whatsoever. And I'm really excited to bring that to the fore.
Yeah, I'm excited to see it. I'm in the process of trying to get my book finished, and same thing. You look at the different research that's going out there by different people, and then you start to talk to those researchers and you say, hey, what about this? And they're like, I have no idea anything about that. Well, what do you mean you don't have anything about that? Because this is, and no, because I don't do it, right?
Next question to explore? No,
right. Because
there's
so tunnel vision on what they're doing, right? And you can't blame them.
No, not at all. So as a sort of final note, I mean, this is where human knowledge is at, is we understand all the big picture stuff generally. So in order to advance human knowledge, which is what scientific researchers, medical researchers are doing, is we need to get into finer and finer detail. So you have a researcher who dedicates their entire research career to understanding what one protein does within one cell type. And that's super important information to understand. But that protein binds with another receptor that binds with another protein that another lab is studying, and they might never talk to each other. Right. And so it's not a failure of scientists to follow the path that we want them to follow in terms of expanding human knowledge. It's a failure of the communication between what scientists are devoting their entire lives to understanding and this just lack of, we need a whole community of people whose job it is to read science from different fields and put those pieces of the puzzle together for the public. So it's really a failure of, or it's just a complete lack of people like us who read the science and then put these pieces together and communicate it for the general public. And that's what we really need more of. We really need more sort of not just science writers, but people who are critically looking at the full body of scientific evidence to understand the consensus, to really dive into the nuance of dissent and be able to communicate that big picture in a way that is actionable for the average American person in Western human being.
Right. And I think that's perfect. And that's exactly what we need to do. And I'll tell you what, if I ask one more question or say one more thing, we'll be on here for another hour. And I know everybody's got big places to go. So Dr. Sarah Ballantyne, thank you so much. For anybody who wants to find out more, go to the Paleo Mom website, go listen to the Paleo Mom podcast or the Paleo View podcast, pick up any one of her books. She's got plenty of great resources on there. I'll put them all in there with the podcast. And I will be, if we can, we'll be reaching out to you and get you back on here sometime soon to finish our conversation, because I only asked 2 of my questions. So,
I want to go through the other 8 questions.
Right. I'll have more by that time. All right. So we'll sign off, everybody. Thank you so much, Dr. Erica. Thanks for coming on. And Dr. Sarah, thank you so much. Take care, everybody. If you have any questions, put them wherever you see the podcast, or, reach out to us and we'll be more than happy to answer. Thank you so much for coming on. Everybody have a great day. Okay.
Yeah, you too.